there are many ways museums could change their traditional approaches. And it's very difficult to say specifically how, but in general, museums were started with some deep traditions, many hundreds of years of traditions in some cases, and we developed best practices over those times. So we have conservation best practices, curatorial practices, design practices, and many of those practices no longer are helpful for the kind of work we have to do in the 21st century. So one of the things we need to do as museum professionals is to really ask ourselves, what are our assumptions about our work? What should we change? What makes it difficult to continue to do creative, innovative work because of the rules and the habits and the patterns and the assumptions about our professional practices. So for example, thinking about protecting objects, all objects from visitors. We don't want visitors to harm the objects. Of course we don't, but there are many ways to think about that, and maybe one of those issues, one of those ways is to think, how might we allow visitors to take photographs of our objects? Why is that a problem? How might we use better equipment to allow visitors to get closer to our objects, to look at them more closely? If indeed what we want people to do is appreciate the objects, then we need to allow them to get as close to the objects as the curators and the scholars do. How can we find ways to do that? So that's just one example of how we all need to change our practices. For designers, we need to be asking ourselves, why are we doing these designs? How can our designs help visitors access the material more deeply? How can our designs help visitors engage with the ideas? Not to look around and say, oh, this is such a beautiful design, but to say, how can this design make the deeper ideas of our humanity and our cultures come alive for visitors? The same with educators. Educators don't need to spend so much time trying to come up with questions to help visitors because visitors already have their own questions. Educators need to understand how to work with content people and design people to create experiences that are experiences directed by visitors, not directed by the museum educators. So I created maybe about 8 years ago now, I started working on a manifesto for the revolution of the creation of museum exhibitions. And the reason I did that was because I think we have so many habits in museums, and we have so many assumptions about how we should be working. For example, many times when we're trying to come up with an innovative, interesting way to create an exhibition, the museum people will say, oh no, we can't do that. That will take too much time. Or we can't do that. Visitors won't understand that. Or we can't do that. This is supposed to last for 10 years. We don't have time to do that. We don't have the money to do that. We don't have the support to do that. So museum people have become very much acting like victims. We can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this. And in fact, we need to just do things differently. So the manifesto starts out by saying, experiment, strive for mutations, make changes, do things, do small things. You don't have to do the biggest, grandest exhibition in the world. Do something small, try it out. Do something cheap, make it out of paper instead of out of marble. See what we can use, see how we can use materials in new and different ways. Bring visitors into the practice with us. Don't think that we are the only people who have knowledge and our visitors are not knowledgeable. That's ridiculous. We also have to join the modern world. We have to join the 21st century. If we don't, we will be left behind. Museums are not necessarily will be here forever. If we don't change, we will not keep up. And if we don't keep up, we will go out of business. And there are many museums now, probably whoever is listening to this, if you work in a museum, you know that we are very worried about where our money is going to come from in the future. If the public does not feel like they need us, we will not have the money to continue. So we need to really rethink our assumptions about the work we do and why we do it. So, are museums open to change and innovation? Yes and no. Everybody I meet in a museum says we need to change. And everybody that I meet who says we need to change, most everybody says, but we don't want to change this and this and this and this. But we want people to like us better. We want people to come visit us. And so yes, we need to change, but we don't really want to change. Change is the hardest thing for a human being, and we need to doing change is like doing anything else, like learning yoga or bicycling or dance or theater or opera. It takes practice, hard practice, to be able to change. So I think most museums, many of the people working with visitors understand the need to change. Many people who work behind the scenes, perhaps not in touch with visitors and community, some of them don't feel that we need to change. And so I think it's a very interesting, even within one museum, there may be a few people who think, yes, we must change, and most people say, no, this is fine just the way it is. So they probably didn't answer you because it's yes and no, but I think that's the way it is. And probably even within one person, you will say, yes, I really want to change. And then if you say, okay, so why don't you try this? They'll say, oh, no, 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 I won't do that. I've been working maybe for the last 15 years to try to help museums change. And to change the ways, primarily to change the ways they work with visitors. So I've looked very closely at three areas of focus within museums. The physical structure, the building, the exhibitions, the space, the way visitors move through space and how space affects their visit. That's one whole area. Another whole area is how we create the exhibitions for visitors or with visitors, how we could look at our exhibitions as a tool for change. And the third one is looking at programs and other ways that we engage visitors and asking how we might create programs that can help museums change. So I have been working with a number of museums around the United States and in Canada, Mexico, and in other parts of the world, looking at our exhibitions that we have right now and how we can turn those exhibitions into more dynamic, more interesting, more relevant places, public places for visitors. Looking at putting in things as simple as putting in more comfortable furniture for people to sit down and stay a while, putting more cafes and places where you can get a cup of coffee, you can relax, you can be yourself, to how we create exhibitions, from how we come up with the ideas, how we have visitors work with us in coming up with the actual exhibition ideas, how we actually design with visitor input, making exhibitions out of cardboard first, inviting visitors in, and then changing those exhibitions based on what visitors say and do. And all of these are experiments. So you could say I'm an experimental practitioner, and I'm really interested in small kind of experimental laboratories within museums so that museum people can practice change and can practice in ways that can really inform us in the future, and then sharing that with other people, other museums, so that we can really develop together and create a network of change across museums.